Google is seeking approval from the U.S. government to release up to 32 million mosquitoes in California and Florida as part of their debug program.
A company that already reads your email and tracks your location just got permission to release 32 million mosquitoes into California and Florida. That's a real sentence, not a meme. That actually happened. Most coverage splits between miracle public health tool and full-blown conspiracy. We're doing neither. We're going to say the honest thing up front. Yes, a lot of these darker possibilities are conceivable, and then we're going to measure how likely they actually are, and separately, how bad they'd be if they were true. Because almost anything is possible. That's not the useful question. The useful question is the odds. Let's start with the plain, true version, because you can't weigh a thing you don't understand. Alphabet, Google's parent company, has a life sciences arm called Verily, and Verily runs a project nicknamed Debug. They breed mosquitoes by the tens of millions in automated nurseries, and then they release them. I know, release more mosquitoes sounds like the plot of a horror movie. Stay with me. 2 facts do most of the work in this whole video. Hold on to them, because every number I give you later leans on them. First, only female mosquitoes bite. The males drink nectar. They physically don't have the parts to bite you. Second, Verily only releases males. So why release millions of males that can't bite? Because they carry a common bacterium called Wolbachia. When a Wolbachia male mates with a wild female, her eggs don't hatch. Do that at a large enough scale, and the local mosquito population collapses. Scientists call the mechanism cytoplasmic incompatibility. And the basic idea here, flood an area with sterile males so the next generation never arrives, isn't new. And it isn't Silicon Valley mad science. We used this very idea decades ago to wipe out the screwworm, a flesh-eating livestock pest, across the United States. The tool is old, and it's proven. What's new is the species, the scale, and who's holding it. In an earlier trial in Fresno, Verily released 14.4 million males, and the number of biting females dropped by about 95%. And this isn't gene editing. Wolbachia is natural. It's already found in roughly 60% of all insect species. Nobody rewrote the mosquito's DNA. They just gave it a bacterial passenger. Now, one important clarification, and I want to say it plainly because it matters. Those headline trials, Fresno, Singapore, Yogyakarta, all used Aedes aegypti. That's the dengue and Zika mosquito. But this new filing, the one Google has put before the EPA, is for a different species, Culex kincafacitus, the southern house mosquito, the one that spreads West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis here in the United States. It's the same Wolbachia mechanism, and the approach should carry over. But the strongest evidence we have is on Aedes, so for Culex, there's a small but real gap in the published record. So here's the official story. Non-biting males, carrying a natural bacterium, crashing the population of a mosquito that spreads disease, dengue and Zika in the earlier work, West Nile in this proposal. On its face, genuinely good public health. That's the floor. And here's the line I want you to carry through the rest of this video. The mosquitoes themselves are probably safe. The precedent, a private company releasing living things at this scale, might not be. A fair and common question people ask right about here is, why not just use dragonflies? They're natural predators. They eat mosquitoes. And they do. Dragonflies and their larvae eat mosquitoes, sometimes a lot of them. A single dragonfly nymph, underwater, can eat dozens of mosquito larvae in a day when conditions are right. So in principle, encouraging dragonflies and other natural predators is genuinely great. For backyard ponds, for wetlands, for stable ecosystems. In those settings, studies show they really can bring mosquito numbers down. But here's what would have to be true for dragonflies to replace a program like Verily's at regional scale. You'd have to mass rear and release enormous numbers of them. And dragonflies are far slower and harder to breed in a factory than mosquitoes are. They'd have to thrive and hunt in the exact places pest mosquitoes explode. Temporary puddles, old tires, clogged gutters, a few days of water in a discarded container. But dragonflies tend to prefer stable, permanent waters, and they'd have to eat mosquitoes fast enough to outpace a reproductive rate that is just staggering. A single Culex female can lay hundreds of eggs at a time. So in practice, dragonflies are a strong supplemental tool, but in a dense pest zone, they get outnumbered fast, and they're nowhere near precise or scalable enough for the kind of dramatic suppression you saw in those Fresno numbers. That's the whole reason engineered reproductive approaches like Wolbachia get pursued in the first place. They're targeted, they're automated, and they hit the next generation directly. Here's the next honest question, and it's in every comment section. What about everything that eats mosquitoes? The birds, the bats, the frogs, the fish? If you crash the mosquitoes, don't you starve everything up the chain? Two things to hold here. First, the males they release aren't poison, they're ordinary food. Anything that eats one is eating a normal mosquito with a common bacterium inside it, the same bacterium that's already in most of the insects that animal eats anyway. Second, and this is the bigger one, this kind of mosquito just isn't a keystone food source. Nothing in North America depends on culex to survive. The predators that snack on them eat dozens of other insects, and they'll keep right on eating. And remember, the goal here is suppression, not extinction. You're knocking a local population down, not wiping a species off the map. And this isn't just theory. Wolbachia mosquito programs have been running for years now on several continents, and nobody has measured a collapse in the birds, the bats, or the fish that feed on them. Could there be knock-on effects worth watching? Of course, and that's a perfectly fair thing to monitor and to publish. But remove one pest mosquito and the whole ecosystem collapses just isn't how a food web that broad and that redundant actually behaves. So now, let's take every darker possibility seriously, one at a time. This is the big one. The fear is, forget sterile bugs. What if they've secretly packed those mosquitoes with a virus, and every release is actually a covert infection? Here's what Google says. The males carry Wolbachia, which is harmless to humans, and they don't bite. Could the dark version be real? In the broadest sense, yes. Mosquitoes have been studied as disease carriers for over a century. A bad actor with an insect factory is a coherent thing to worry about, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But think about what would have to be true. They'd have to be releasing females, because males can't bite. They'd have to hide a live pathogen from the EPA, from independent academics, from rival companies, and from activist groups who trap and dissect these mosquitoes, hoping to catch exactly this. And they'd have to choose mosquitoes, slow, weather-dependent, and traceable straight back to the one company holding the permit, over every faster, more deniable method available to a trillion-dollar company. None of those are impossible. They're each just unlikely, and the theory needs all of them at once. So how likely is it? I'd put it at a 1 out of 10. How bad would it be if it were true? A 9. Notice what just happened. Very bad and very unlikely. Those are two completely different numbers. Keep watching that gap. This one usually starts from a real headline. AI and robots rear the mosquitoes. People hear robot mosquitoes. What's actually being said is that robots build the mosquitoes. The automation is the factory equipment. The bug itself is biological. Here's what Google says. Robotics and AI handle the mass rearing and the sorting. The thing they release is a living insect. Could it be real? As a concept, yes. Insect-scale microdrones genuinely exist in research labs, so I won't wave it away. This isn't science fiction, it's an active field. But what would have to be true? You'd need 32 million working microdrones, each one with a power source, sensors, a radio, and days of outdoor flight. The battery problem at that size isn't solved. You'd have to mass produce them at the cost of a biological insect, release them, and have not a single one turn up dead and dissected, despite all that scrutiny. The barrier here isn't Google wouldn't, it's where the engineering actually is today. How likely? 1 out of 10. Possible in principle, blocked by present-day engineering, not by physics forever. How bad if it were true? A 6. Mass airborne surveillance would be bad, but a bug that small can carry so little that even the nightmare version is limited. And honestly, the phone already in your pocket does it better. The leap makes sense. The program works by sterilizing mosquitoes, so your mind jumps. Are we next? Here's what Google says. The sterility comes from Wolbachia disrupting insect reproduction. There's no equivalent mechanism in mammals. Could it be real? Covert mass sterilization is one of the oldest, darkest fears in public health. and there are real historical abuses behind it, so the fear is earned. I won't dismiss it. But for it to be real here, two things would both have to be true. You'd need a way to deliver it into humans, but the males don't bite. And you'd need an insect-specific reproductive bacterium to act on human biology, a mechanism that, as far as anything science knows, simply doesn't connect. Both of those would have to be false at the same time, and right now, neither is. How likely? 1 out of 10. How bad if it were true? A 10. About as bad as it gets. Which is exactly why it deserves a careful answer, instead of a laugh. Same shape, shorter. The claim is that the bug, or the bacterium, carries something that changes how people think or behave. Could it be real? In principle, compounds do affect behavior. That's just pharmacology, so the category isn't absurd. But what would have to be true? A delivery route. Again, no bite. Plus a compound that survives inside a mosquito, doses correctly across millions of different sized people, produces a reliable effect, and stays invisible to every independent lab watching. That's not one unlikely thing, it's 5, all required together. How likely? 1 out of 10. How bad if it were true? An 8. So all 4 headline theories land in the same place. Bad if true, but the conditions for true just don't hold. Now here's the part that actually matters, because once you clear those away, there are possibilities where the likelihood number doesn't stay at 1, it climbs. Here's the rule change. Everything up to now asked whether the bug can hurt you. Everything from here asks something subtler. What happens when one private company runs a machine that releases living, reproducing things into shared air at the scale of a continent? Watch the numbers move. Could it be real? It doesn't just could, it openly does, at a small, acknowledged rate. No sorting process is 100%. But how bad is it realistically? The females that slip through aren't engineered super mosquitoes. They're ordinary local kulaks, the same house mosquito already in your neighborhood. The worst case is just that the program suppresses the population a little less than hoped. Nothing in your backyard you didn't already have. Although here's the sharper version of this one. The entire safety promise rests on 2 words, only males. So the real question was never whether Google means it, it's who gets to independently check it. Who's actually counting the ones that slip through, and do you ever get to see that number? That's exactly what public dockets and independent monitoring are for. How likely? 4 out of 10. How bad? A 2. This one has real, peer-reviewed precedent, but from a different company. A study of a trial run by Oxitec, and that's a separate firm, using genuinely gene-edited mosquitoes, not Verili's bacteria, reported that some engineered offspring survived and passed bits of their DNA into the local wild population. Oxitec disputes that reading, and the fight is still live. But the core finding got published, and it was never retracted. Released genetic material can persist. So what would have to be true for Verily? Verili's approach is self-limiting. The effect is designed to fade. The persistence problem attaches to gene-edited bugs, and to replacement programs built specifically to make a bacterium stay. Verily is neither. So it's a real risk in the field, and a low one for this particular design. How likely for Verili's design? 2 out of 10. How bad? A 3. Though higher for the gene-edited cousins this so often gets confused with. This is the one I actually want you to leave with. Not because it's happening, but because it's the possibility a thoughtful person should keep an eye on. There's a technology called a gene drive. Normally, a gene passes to about half your offspring. A gene drive cheats inheritance, so a change sweeps through almost an entire species, fast and on purpose. In the lab, a CRISPR gene drive has already wiped out a caged population of malaria mosquitoes completely. And the whole point of a drive is that it's built to spread and persist.
You make them genetically modified in the lab. You have a population of mosquitoes, you release them in the field, they will be able to mate with the wild population, with the wild mosquitoes.
Which means some of its effects could be, in the words of the national academies, effectively irreversible. Verily is not doing this. Let me be completely clear. Debug is bacteria, not gene drives, and building a working gene drive is a hard, separate scientific project. So could the dark version be real later? This is where, yes, it's possible, carries real weight. Verily isn't building the dangerous payload. What they're building is the delivery system, the factories, the regulatory relationships, the public comfort with the idea that a company releasing engineered bugs is just normal now. That infrastructure isn't a gene drive, but it's the rails a dangerous payload could ride on, if the owner, or the incentives, or the rules ever changed. What would have to be true? New science, changed intent, and weakened oversight, all three at once. Each one is possible. Together, today, it's unlikely. But it's not 1 in 10 forever unlikely, and that's the point. How likely from this program? 3 out of 10. How bad if it did happen? A 9. Possibly irreversible ecological change. That's exactly why the boring, ongoing regulatory attention is worth it. Picture this. A region's mosquito problem gets worse at exactly the moment one private firm owns the dominant factories, the AI sorting, the surveillance data, and the release logistics. Public agencies become dependent on that company. And the entity best positioned to fix the problem is the same one best positioned to have caused it. And it isn't just the factories. All of this throws off data, where mosquitoes breed, when populations spike, how they move block by block. Own the machine, and you quietly own one of the richest environmental datasets going. That's not sinister on its own. It's just one more piece of capability landing in private hands, with very little visibility from anyone else. Could it be real? Nobody even has to be evil for this. It's just how markets concentrate. It's less a plot than a default. What keeps it in check? Competitors. Oxtech, academic groups, public programs create some friction against a clean monopoly. How likely? 5 out of 10. How bad? A 6. When you release bugs into open air, anyone who later gets bitten by anything obviously never signed a consent form. That's just the nature of it. And the track record is mixed. An early Oxitec program in the Cayman Islands was criticized for releasing before properly consulting the community, while the big dengue trial in Indonesia did secure community buy-in across 37 urban villages first. Could it be real? It already has been, in places. Good consent is clearly achievable, it just isn't guaranteed. And a fast-moving private operator is exactly the kind that could skip it where engagement is weak. How likely? 6 out of 10. How bad? A 5. So let's read the whole scorecard. Every single one of these was possible. I never told you otherwise. But the headline theories, disease, nanobots, sterilization, mind control, they all score terrifying on how bad and right at the floor on how likely. That gap is the entire anatomy of how a fear runs away from its own evidence. The dread is real, and it's earned, and then the mind quietly slides the likelihood up to match it. Now look lower. The unglamorous ones, corporate dependency, weak consent, the long-term gene drive path, none of them make a dramatic thumbnail, but those are the likelihood numbers that climb. 3, 5, 6. There's a name for what those quieter scores add up to. Capability without accountability. Not a villain, not a plot, just a powerful, scaled, environment-changing capability sitting in private hands, and the rest of us with very little ability to see inside it, to audit it, or to say no. That asymmetry is the actual story. It was never the bug. So here's what I want you to take with you. The current bug is, honestly, a small marvel. The danger is being asked to swap a control system for trust. And trust, unlike a genetic change already loose in the wild, is not a safety mechanism. So I'm not going to tell you what's possible and what isn't. Almost all of it is possible. I'm telling you where the odds actually sit, and where they don't. Don't fixate on the bug. Ask for the boring things, open data, truly independent audits, by outside scientists, not the company's own. Monitoring results that get published instead of buried, and a real public yes before anyone releases anything. That's not paranoia. That's just the price of letting anyone do this at all. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Which theory did I miss? Drop it in the comments. And don't just name it. Give me your 2 numbers. How likely do you think it is out of 10? And how bad would it be if it were true out of 10? Because the whole point of putting a number on something is that you're allowed to argue about the number. So argue with me. The sharpest ones, the theories and the scores that actually make me stop and rethink. I'll pull into a follow-up and score them right here, on screen. So tell me where you think the odds really sit. I'm reading.